Hello, War of the Ring players. B. Hilly again, back with another game from the 2025 War of the Ring World Tournament. This is the round of 32. I'm playing against Waldo, who graciously, as all my previous two opponents, have been gracious enough to allow me to cast these games. We actually played this game just a few hours ago, and I'm very excited to show it to you. Thank you to everybody who's provided feedback so far in the YouTube comments. I know folks have asked me about increasing the size of army numbers and just changing the visuals a little bit. I'm still working on that. Some of the setups that have been shared with me haven't exactly worked yet. It's a little bit finicky to get um, the broadcasting studio working, so I'm still fiddling around with it. I'm not quite happy with where it is yet, but I've heard that those bits of feedback, and it's been taken on board, and I'll be updating my settings uh, as we move forward here. I think my my goal in the coming few weeks is to also start. I've played some absolute banger Lords of Middle Earth games, and I've started teaching myself Warriors of Middle Earth because I know there's been a lot of interest in expansion content because there isn't a lot of that being created right now. So as I ramp up on learning Warriors, expect some of that content probably in a few months from now as I get more comfortable with the game and feel like I have more to comment on. I'm still very much learning it. I've played 4 games of Warriors total in my life, so I don't feel like I have a lot of valuable input to provide yet. But on the Lords of Middle Earth side, I have some really good games that I've played in the last few months, especially in the league, that I want to start bringing to this channel. So expect some of those Lords matches in the coming weeks. And without further ado, we'll jump into this game. This ended up being a really good one. I won't spoil it, but Waldo played great, and it was an awesome game. So let's get started. I allocate 0 eyes and roll none. And this is part of the argument of, do you allocate 0 or 1? This can happen. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I'm happy to have 3 musters, and 4 C dice isn't great. I'd prefer 4 army dice, honestly, or 4 H dice, or even 3 army dice and a palantir would be fine. But four C dice is pretty good. I'm curious if people. Well, let's look at what my opponent rolls. So my opponent has 2 moves, which are obviously going to use for movement, and then these 2 musters. So I'm wondering if folks can predict what I'm going to do this turn. I'm not sure it's a super standard thing to do, but it did feel right in this game, given what I rolled here. And yeah, make your predictions, write them down. Let me know in the comments if you were right or wrong. Uh, and I'll show you what happens. So my opponent moves make sense. I'm of course going to bring Isengard and Sauron to war, and I do that. And now, it might make sense to just bring Saruman into play here. Is my opponent really gonna use a ring to separate Gandalf and then use that will to bring Gandalf the White into play? Probably not. But I don't really want to even afford that opportunity. So what I do is perhaps somewhat interesting. So I move this Barad-dûr army out to Minas Morgul here. And why do you suppose I'm doing that? Because I can get to Osgiliath this turn, and yes, that means my opponent can muster into Minas Tirith, but that also means I get the Witch King if my opponent chooses to go that route. Uh, and if they want to get a recruit in Minas Tirith, that means they're not going to be able to move a third time and get past Moria with a ring. And so, as I've talked about in previous videos, a huge part of playing Shadow is forcing your opponent to make hard choices. And I'm not sure that's the hardest choice, but it did feel like an interesting choice to make my opponent have to make. So, yep, I go ahead and move out to North Ithilien. So now, of course, Waldo's thinking here about what to do and chooses to muster the elves down. Obviously, worried about me getting the Witch King, chooses not to muster Gondor down. So now I assume this H die, because of how this was spent, is going to be used potentially as a move. And so I go ahead and attack Asgiliath, only get one hit, and so now I've pressed, and my opponent has an interesting choice here. He actually thought about this for quite a while. It happens pretty quickly in the replay, but he thought quite a while about where to move that regular. And, he was probably considering Lossarnock, as he moved it to, Minas Tirith, or South Athelion. And I was actually a little bit worried about the South Athelion play, because if he had retreated to South Athelion, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have used this muster to get a minion to get Saruman. Um, I probably would have used it to muster into Minas Morgul if he'd retreated to South Athelion and then does what he did, which is muster Gondor the rest of the war. Now, I'm not sure, given the direction, given he moved back to Lossarnock, I'm not sure I love this. I think if you were gonna muster Gondor to war, moving that unit to South Athelion pressures my dice. Because now I have to really think about, do I want to give you those 2 cheap victory points in Minas Morgul, or do or do I want to protect that and not get a minion, right? Like, or do I just want to get a minion and let you take Minas Morgul with your first action next turn? I think probably, my opponent knows that by bringing, I can only get one minion anyway. Like, if this would have gotten me both Saruman and Sauron, like if I still had 2 musters left or whatever, this would be definitely a questionable play. But uh, you know, it's it's good. But I think if because now you can use your first action to muster in Minas Tirith. But I think if you were going to do this, retreating to South Athelion was probably a little bit better. Um, but so I end up with the Witch King. Turn 1 Witch King, highly unusual. But here we are. So yeah, there you go. I say turn 1 Witch King, not something you see every day. And I draw into Orc Control. King is revealed. I mean, those are cards that I'm probably going to cycle, unless the Fellowship gets revealed really quickly. And my opponent gets a great roll, and I wish this is not the roll I would have asked for. 1 muster is good because that means that I can get Saruman, but on a turn where my opponent has now rolled a will and I have a minion in play, I don't really want to hit the Fellowship. So 4 eyes, like normally as they're moving into Moria, would be okay, but I don't really want to get a hit this turn because I don't want Gandalf the White coming into play. So my opponent goes ahead and, as predicted, uses their first action to muster in Minas Tirith, and I bring in Saruman, and then I see what my opponent is going to do here. So this is a big move. If my opponent can kill Gandalf the White here, you know they can kind of do whatever they want with this H dice, with this H die that they have remaining. If they don't kill Gandalf the White here, there's going to be a lot of pressure to move again with that H die. So I'm actually really happy to get a miss there, right? Yep, I'm very happy with a miss there, as I say in chat. And now what would you do here? If you've been following along with my general, theme of forcing the Free People player to make hard decisions, that's what I do. I decide to make my opponent make a hard choice, and I go for Pelargir. And King is revealed as an easy card to cycle. It's not a combat card I particularly want, so I just go ahead and take 1 hit to make sure that I kill the Pelargir unit to give myself much better odds of killing it. Because I'm still, and to get a cycle, to get hopefully a better one. And then I also really wanted to kill that unit because I wanted the other half move from one of these army dice when I move into Lamadon. And so now my opponent has kind of a tough choice here. Do you try to get Gandalf the White? Do you ring move with that H? Again, not guaranteed that you'll even get a hit. You probably will. Four dice on 5s is pretty likely to get a hit. But do you play for Gandalf the White here, or do you play to defend Dol Amroth? And I think it largely depends on your cards, what decision to make here. And you'll see why I say that in just a second. But my opponent goes ahead and decides to move again, but with the will. So they're not going to try to get Gandalf this turn. Turns out they could have, but I'm sure they're happy with a Gandalf kill and a non-reveal here. I certainly would be. And so I move out toward Dol Amroth. My opponent musters into Dol Amroth, and I put it under siege. So I feel pretty good about the probability of taking that. I've got a Deadly Strife and a Great Host. Those are perfect for knocking down Dol Amroth, right? You attack, you lead with the Deadly Strife, and then on your second round, you play this Great Host, and that probably cleans it up. Now, uh, I get a decent roll here. This is fine. I'm happy with this. I mean, one Palantir would have been better than two. I would have really liked a sea die here to move some of my minions around or to move my Nazgul around. Um, if I needed to, right? Especially when this happens. My opponent doesn't get any musters, but did have Imrahil. So now I'm not feeling great about this choice to go after Dol Amroth. One of the reasons that I rushed it is, taking down Dol Amroth before the elves are at war is great. Uh, it really makes it harder to defend because with the elves not at war, Círdan isn't playable. And so there was only one card that could potentially defend it here. My opponent's drawn 3 out of 24. I felt like I had a really good shot at just taking 3 quick victory points between Pelargir and Dol Amroth, and that is not going to happen. So now I'm in a bit of a bind because I don't have a way to move my Witch King, and I don't really want to be attacking into a 7 hit point, 1 leadership army with a 9 hit point, 4 leadership army. That's a recipe for potentially losing the Witch King. And so I decide I'm going to go for Woodland Realm because my opponent doesn't have a way to block Old Forest Road. I actually undo that move even though I killed the die, and Waldo's kind enough to let me do that. And the reason is because I had been allocating this Many Kings to the Service of Mordor card as a combat card as opposed to its text effect, but now that Dol Amroth is reinforced, I'm not going to be using it for its combat ability in Dol Amroth because I don't have double, and it's unlikely I will for quite some time, and I don't really want to be attacking into that. Especially like the ideal circumstance here would be able to be to fly the rest of my Nazgul to Dol Amroth, use dreadful spells, try to get a hit or two, and then attack with like Orc Patrol and try to whittle it down before I then hit it with a Deadly Strife. That's what I would like to do. I didn't roll any sea dice, so I can't do that. So I have to decide what else I'm going to do with this turn. And something that you need to be thinking about. My opponent, those dice for my opponent are allocated. Like no musters, right, and only sea dice. So I know those sea dice are going to be used to move. And what I don't want to do is give up that Asgiliath position to the units from Minas Tirith. That is a recipe for disaster. I've said this before, either in the strategy discussion on the Discord or in chat or just to opponents. Like I actually think, and Asgiliath is the most powerful space on the board. Um, it it gives whoever has an army parked in there so much control over everything that happens in Umbar, in Gondor, in some ways in Rohan, in Mordor. Like it just if the Free People army is parked in Osgiliath, Shadow has to be so careful about potentially giving up a Free People military victory, and it makes the any Dol Amroth points or Pelargir points fundamentally less secure, even if you've taken them. So I really want to have armies moved into Osgiliath on this turn, and so that is my priority is actually getting that South Round and Easterling army into Osgiliath. So the reason that playing Many Kings ended up being important is because now I don't have to bring in the units from Umbar. I don't need another half move for that. So that means that I can allocate 2 half moves, two army dice here to moving this army from near Harad into Osgiliath and this army from Dol Guldur into Old Forest Road, while the north is not blocking access to Woodland Realm. So that's what I go ahead and do. I just start. I make both of those moves. And then I move to flip the north and then realize, of course, that the Witch King is already out, so everything should be active. My opponent moves is missed, and they're now at step 5 without being revealed. So I am getting a little nervous here because I had kind of, in my mind, banked these 2 Dol Amroth victory points as part of my overall plan, and now it's not clear that I'm actually going to get them. A forward mustering card would really help. Even actually Corsairs would be amazing because then I could recruit into Umbar and then Corsairs into into Dol Amroth, I have to bring the South Rounds and Easterlings to war, of course, to be able to do that. But those are things that can happen in the future. But one of the things I am worried about now is like I've had the Witch King out for 3 turns now and cycled only 1 card, which is not great. A huge part of the Witch King's job is to be burning through these decks to get the critical Deadly Stripes and the A New Power is Rising and Corsairs and things that really actually help accelerate Shadow's military game. So since I don't really want to be drawing here, so I go ahead and put Shelob in play, because given that my opponent has moved 5 steps, I do want some things that I expect that I'm not going to have much of an opportunity to slow down my opponent before Mordor, so I need things that potentially slow my opponent down in Mordor. So I go ahead and just play Shelob here. And now, so my opponent moves again, makes sense. I miss again. So my opponent is now on step 6. I've only hit them once, so this is either going to be a military or a dunk game in my mind at this point. And I'm now clocking a likely turn 7, possibly even turn 6 dunk. And the reason I say turn 6 is one of the options my opponent has here is to ring move with this Palantir and be 3 steps away. And then potentially, even if they get revealed, they're almost certainly going to get hit on this next move. I say that, but a 1-3-2 would, miss them if they moved again, because I'm going to hit on 4s, so I've got an 87.5% chance to hit them if they move again here. So it's likely they get hit, and then, it is pretty likely they get revealed. How many? What do we got there? We've got 9 reveal tiles and 6 non-reveal tiles. So basically a 50% chance of revealing them if they move again. So what I actually really don't want my opponent to ring move here with this Palantir. So I do something a little tricky. I think the standard use of this muster die would be to bring the South Rounds and Easterlings down 1, because I clearly am going to need them to have a chance in this game. But I go ahead and muster into Orthanc. And the reason I do that is actually to try to induce a use of a ring on the Palantir to defend Rohan. And so my opponent actually thinks about this for quite a while, which is totally fair. This is an important decision and an important point in the game. And my opponent actually ends up moving the regular from Iron Hills into Erebor, and they move back from Fords of Isen into Helm's Deep, and says feels bad, needs to look at it. So he contemplates this for a while, and then eventually goes with it. And then I do tell him, if it makes you feel better, I was absolutely going to attack Fords, because I was. The plan was to, especially given that I have Threats and Promises in my hand, and that's only playable in Helm's Deep at this point. I was really planning. I was thinking about attacking Fords of Isen and maybe even playing the Deadly Strife. Now that, of course, runs the risk of running into a Scouts, but a little piece of meta information that I gained because of this move that my opponent did is I know they don't have a Scouts in hand right now. If they had a Scouts in hand, they would almost certainly not make this move. And something else that I really probably should have realized at the time was if they were willing to make this move, the move that they made here, and not bring the army out of Edoras into Westamnet, they almost certainly have Aemir in hand. This is an odd choice of how to defend Helm's Deep, unless and only unless you have Aemir. Otherwise, it makes sense for that second move, maybe not to be Iron Hills and instead to be up into Westamnet from Edoras. My opponent has to feel pretty confident that they can still hold Helm's Deep against what's in Orthanc, and the only way to really have that kind of confidence is to be holding Aemir. And I didn't really think about that at the time, but that was knowable. And spoiler alert, my opponent has Aemir in hand. But what I don't do, I now don't come out of Orthanc, which I think is important. And I group up in Eastern because I know I'm going to have to make that move eventually, because I've got this army of Easterlings is my plan to go take Erebor. So, at this point, I'm kind of running through my options. And this is where I landed. I'm assuming that my points are going to be Erebor, Woodland Realm, Helm's Deep, Pelargir, Dale, and then the place where my options really come in are, if I draw Denethor's Folly, I'm going to go for Minas Tirith. And if I don't draw Denethor's Folly, I'm going to plan on using that as Gileath army to reinforce in Dol Amroth. And what I'd really like to do is be able to pull that if I need it, right? So like what I'd really like here is a Shadows Gather or a Shadow Lengthens or uh uh Ulaghai or um Half Orcs and Goblin Men or um Hill Trolls so that I can either forward muster into Dol Amroth or pull or Corsairs. So there's 6 cards in the deck that would help me reinforce Dol Amroth. And 6 out of 20 is pretty good odds. That just, with my next top deck, that's pretty good odds. That's more than 25%. And then, you only have to draw maybe 3 cards to have a 60+% chance to draw one of those 6 cards. So I'm feeling pretty good about the probability that I get to reinforce Dol Amroth. And so, the question is just, do I pull one of those 6 cards before I pull Denethor? Because if I pull Denethor, I'm gonna go for Minas Tirith with the Osgiliath army, and then just not worry about Dol Amroth. So that's the plan right now. And let's see. Now I pull Fighting Uruk-hai, which is awesome, given that Helm's Deep is one of my planned strongholds to get to 10. So this is an important roll because, again, no sea dice. So I started by rolling 4 sea dice turn 1, and now I had 1 on turn 2, but I needed that to attack Pelargir to get to Dol Amroth. And so now in the last 2 turns, I've rolled 0 sea dice, and also in this turn, 0 Palantirs. So even if I had Black Captain or Ringwraiths or whatever, I cannot, or even Nazgul Search or Nazgul Strike. Like if I had a Palantir and Nazgul Search or Nazgul Strike right now, I would seriously consider using that and just not getting its adverse effects on the Fellowship just to relocate the Witch King so I can start cycling. And now, Waldo has sort of some doubts about the play last turn, in which he chose to defend Helm's Deep instead of use a ring to move. Because with this roll, if he'd moved and not been revealed, he'd have a really good shot of getting in this turn. So thinks some thoughts and ends up playing I Will Go Alone. And I actually love this. Like, something that is really important when you're the Fellowship is just Fellowship management in general. Like, yeah, it's good to not be hit, but going into Mordor with a completely full Fellowship has drawbacks. Like, getting down to Gollum is good. It actually makes you faster. And makes you immune from things like or not immune, but makes Candles of Corpses far less effective, right? And makes Bilbo Song more effective, makes There Is Another Way much more effective as a card, right? So Fellowship management is important, and given that my opponent has moved 6 times, pulled only 1 tile, and lost only Gandalf, they're feeling pretty good about their corruption, and I would as well if I were in their shoes. So they can move. They've moved 6 spaces, and they choose to throw Legolas into Woodland Realm. And so, while I really like this play, I probably would have done Gimli and a Hobbit, or even Gimli and Legolas into Erebor, because just Legolas into Woodland Realm is good, but he's probably still going to die. Whereas Gimli and Erebor is pretty scary, because even with Legolas in there, Woodland Realm could still be over in 1 round, especially since I'm holding a Deadly Strife. But Erebor is going to be multiple rounds, so a companion can make a much bigger impact on a siege that goes multiple rounds, that is guaranteed to go multiple rounds. So I really like playing I Will Go Alone here. I would have done something slightly different in terms of which companion or companions I separated and where I put them. So now I'm kind of have a choice here. I can choose to muster into Orthanc. I have 5 attacks, so I can actually use these 2 musters to muster twice into Orthanc, and then fully cover up Rohan. Half a move to Ford's Vyzin, the other half can be Easter into Iron Hills, and then into Westamnet, into Fold, into Edoras, into Helm's Deep. That's 5 attacks. And so I actually sit and consider this for a while. But ultimately I decide my board position and like the way that I win this game, since it involves Erebor, and since it involves needing reinforcements from probably needing reinforcements from Umbar or Osgiliath in Dol Amroth, I decide that I really actually need the Southrons and Easterlings at war. And so rather than fully covering up Rohan, I decide to bring the Southrons and Easterlings down. Because look, next turn I could roll 0 musters, and then I'm in trouble. And so, while covering up all of Rohan would be fun, it is likely that there will be a future turn in which I roll 5 attacks, and could still cover up all of Rohan if that's what I decide to do. But covering up all of Rohan isn't really the goal. Helm's Deep is the goal. So I do decide to go with Southrons and Easterlings here. And I actually use one of these H dice to muster again in Orthanc. And so, I'm hedging just a little bit. That 301 army, I could have taken it with a 4-2 army and fighting Urukai. Pretty confident in that. However, I decide, yeah, I'll hedge a little bit just in case he has AMR. And as previously stated, I should have known that he had AMR. And now this army probably isn't large enough when I do move it out, and I move out all of it. I don't keep anybody in Orthanc because if my opponent was going to bring in Gandalf, they would have done it already. Would I have that many? If they have Mirror of Galadriel, and they were going to play that and bring in Gandalf, they would have done that already before I brought the Southrons and Easterlings to war. Because now they put, if they're going to play Mirror of Galadriel and make a will and then threaten, Orthanc with Ents by bringing Gandalf into Fangorn, they wouldn't risk that will against Day Without Dawn by letting me muster Southrons and Easterlings before they made that play. So I'm 99.5% confident my opponent doesn't have Mirror of Galadriel, so I feel okay about just vacating Orthanc. And so I move into Fords of Eisen, I move into Iron Hills up here, and then, of course, what we've been talking about happens. AMR gets recruited. And so one of the things I'd actually been worried about with my opponent launching Legolas into Woodland Realm was that he had Thranduil. Given what I said about I probably would have put Gimli and Erebor, or maybe even Gimli and Legolas and Erebor, given that my opponent did put Legolas in Woodland Realm, I am 90% convinced that my opponent has Thranduil. And so now, given that my opponent has only sea dice showing, I decide to do something a little strange. Maybe you could call it strange. And try to force the issue with Woodland Realm before my opponent has a chance to play Thranduil. So I put it under, my opponent moves, is missed, and then I use an attack, I use a ring on that H dice to move all of my Nazgul up to Woodland Realm. Because again, if my opponent has Thranduil and they want to give me another ring to play it and not move not move another step this turn, I am happy with that trade. Super happy with that trade. But I'm, kind of assuming even if they have Thranduil, they're probably still going to move this turn again. So this gives me a really good opportunity to blow up Woodland Realm before they have a chance to play Thranduil. So they go ahead and move again. I finally hit the Fellowship. It's been a long time. This has been since the last time I hit them, I think was step 4 maybe. And so this is only the second time I've hit the Fellowship, and I do get a reveal, which is big. And the second one is an I, fine. But now I'm going to proceed with my plan of trying to blow up, Woodland Realm. So I lead with the Shadow card, or a character card. Sorry, of course it's a Shadow card. I lead with a character card because I'm, I don't. I assume that if my opponent has a big defense card, they're going to play it first. I'm curious if people can intuit what I'm going to play here. It's a card that's maybe a little odd to play here. but I don't want to lead with the Deadly Strife because I assume my opponent is parked on a daylight or something. And if I play a Deadly Strife right here against a daylight, like this siege is done. I'm going to need to reinforce it. So I actually lead with Black Breath. Um, I don't play. I have no way to play Mortal Wound here. And this, as previously stated, just does not seem like it's going to be a corruption game. This is just a pure race, and so I'm hoping to cycle into Cruel Weather or just something like Nazgul Search or Strike that will help me slow down the Fellowship next turn and try to keep them out of Mordor. Uh, and so I cycle a character card. And the other thing is, as predicted, right? Like my opponent feels like they need to play a big card because I could just roll 3 6s, right? And then that choice of moving Legolas in all of a sudden amounts to nothing if I just roll 3 6s. So the other reason I played that I was pretty happy to play Black Breath was like, yeah, maybe I get a 6 or 2 on the reroll and I can just kill Legolas. That makes the next round super straightforward. So what happens is I still get a 6, and my opponent unfortunately gets for my opponent gets no hits back. Hits there would have been a pretty big deal. 2 hits would have been huge. 3 hits would have been massive. 1 hit probably not a big deal because then I still have 5. Um, but I press and draw. So now my opponent has 2 HP and Legolas, and I have a full 5/5. So I go, and I know they just played a daylight, so I go for the gusto and play Deadly Strife into a heroic death, and I managed to roll a combination of 5 ones. So not exactly what I was looking for. And my opponent gets 3 hits back. So of course my opponent takes Legolas here, makes sense. And so yeah, I say that's probably the win for you right there. And I genuinely mean that. I think that basically broke the siege. Um, and uh, not great for Shadow that went as badly as it did. Even I don't even need 4 hits from Deadly Strife there. Just 3 hits would make a huge difference, right? A 2-0-1 against 3 hit points is so dangerous. With a sudden strike, for example, um, and you potentially imperil the Witch King. So yeah, not I'm now not feeling good about my chances at all. I assume my opponent's going to get into Woodland Realm next turn, or Woodland Realm. My opponent's going to get uh, into Mordor next round. I've now been stymied in Dol Amroth. I've been stymied in Woodland Realm. Things are just not looking good. And then I draw Balrog when I'm searching for something to impact the Fellowship, and I'm not attacking Mori in this game. So not feeling good, but I fortunately top deck Nazgul Search. So and New Powers Rising. So I mean, great cards. Perfect. Maybe the 2 cards I would have picked if given an option. Uh, Instead of a New Powers Rising, it may have, something that also would have been nice would have been any of those reinforcement cards for Dol Amroth, but still, a New Powers Rising is great because it helps offset the defense my opponent put up in Helm's Deep because I no longer feel good about those victory points. So instead of being in a board position where I expected to almost have seven victory points locked up at this point in the game, I have 1 and no real clear path to on those strongholds that I'd intended to take. So I mean, really great play by Waldo. Just to I was sort of second guessing that move of Legolas to Woodland Realm, but it worked out, right? Like that my Waldo made some great plays here to put him at this point, maybe a full turn or 2 ahead on when he's likely to dunk versus when I'm likely to get a military victory. So we move to the next round. I roll too many eyes, but at least I finally roll some character dice. That's good, I guess. So now I have I have the ability. My opponent rolls 2 movement, but again, that decision way back on turn 2 to not use the ring on the H die to go for Gandalf when my opponent had the will turn 2. We're now on turn 5 and still no Gandalf. Like my opponent has not rolled a will since turn 2. Um, so there's a real dice economy problem for the free people here, and so my opponent, of course, uses their first die to hide. And so now, if you look at this, like, what would you do as what is your plan for these dice if you're in my shoes? And the plan that I sketched out was like the only way I can keep my opponent out is if I get Cruel Weather, and I don't really want to attack Woodland Realm, and if I attack Dale, I open myself up to Woodland Realm sorting. So um, I basically decide what I've got to do here is lead with Orc Patrol and just pray that I pull the 33% chance of either one of these 1 reveals or 2 reveals. Because if I get that in combination with Nazgul Search, I can keep my opponent out of Mordor this turn. So that means that my talent here and one of my C dice is accounted for, so I still have a muster, an army die, and a C. So I decide that other C I'm going to use for dreadful spells because I might just get 2 hits on Woodland Realm and take it. Even 1 hit would be great though, because then a New Powers Rising is an auto kill on Woodland Realm. And while I was worried that my opponent had Thranduil, I knew Thranduil was probably not getting played this turn because they don't have enough dice to both play Thranduil and guarantee that they get into Mordor. So I go ahead and do exactly that. I lead with Orc Patrol. And this is where now the game gives me back a little bit of luck that had been sorely lacking in those first 8 moves by the Fellowship. I do get a reveal here. And so now I know that I just bought one of those turns back that Waldo had bought himself with his excellent defensive play. So I get that reveal, and my opponent doesn't know that he's guaranteed to be kept out this turn, but I certainly do. So I go ahead and play Dreadful Spells, hoping for 2. I get 1. That's fine. So now, my original plan with that muster had been to play a New Powers Rising with that muster if I got 2 hits here, but now I'm planning to use a New Powers Rising for the combat effect to take Woodland Realm. So my opponent moves, and I get a 0 reveal on the move. So this is great. Now I also don't even need to use that Nazgul Search. And really sad for if you're in the free player's shoes, you don't know that I have Nazgul Search, and that it didn't really matter that you got revealed there, but feels bad, right? When it seems like Mordor is possible this turn, and then you come up just a little short. So yeah, I attack with Great Host, and my opponent plays Confusion. This is a great play, right? There are a few cards here that could have disrupted a Great Host, and if if somebody's attacking you with 3 hit points against 1 hit point, you got to assume that it's a Great Host or something like that. And so, how do you disrupt a Great Host? Either with a Sudden Strike or with a Confusion. And so, if I roll a 1 and no hit here, I'm in pretty big trouble, because then if my opponent rolls a hit, I am at 1 HP. Woodland Realm does not fall, and my opponent can sortie and kill the Witch King. So, pretty tricky spot. But I get a 6 and a 1, so fine, and my opponent gets a hit back. So Woodland Realm barely falls. Great play by Waldo. And he took his chances here, and in some percentage of games those would have paid off, and he would have just won the game right there and wiped out the Witch King, or set it up for a potential sortie. And I draw into Shadow Lengthens, so this is great. Exactly one of the cards that I was looking for to reinforce in Dol Amroth. So I go ahead and just do a standard muster in Orthanc. It would have been more efficient to play a New Powers Rising, but I felt like the borderline guaranteed to take on Woodland Realm by playing that was more valuable than an additional muster die or an additional muster in Orthanc. I think that's probably, and I also got to cycle a card. So, and I got one of the cards that I needed. So, maybe not super optimal, but it made sense to me at the time. So my opponent hides, and then I move the Nazgul up to Iron Hills, and briefly think about putting a Nazgul on North Ithilien on the Fellowship to get a reroll, but then I decide against it. And truthfully, this is me playing a little bit of mind games here. And I say that because, by acting like I'm going to put a Nazgul on North Ithilien and get the reroll and then decide better of it, it does really seem like I have Cruel Weather and I don't want to hit you. on your move, so I am a little bit playing mind games here. I will admit to that. And I end up putting the Nazgul up in Forts of Eisen. Because obviously, like my two targets here are at the moment Erebor and Helm's Deep, so I put my leadership where I need it. And so now I get Nazgul Strike. Not great, right? Like, um, I really only need one of Nazgul Strike or Nazgul Search, given that my opponent is one away from Mordor. What I would have really preferred here is, of course, Cruel Weather. But that there was only a 1 in 18 chance of pulling that, so I'm not gonna complain. Um, and then this roll is actually fine, you know. Um, and it's my thought process on this turn. I remember pretty clearly uh, what I decide to do here. So, and my opponent gets 2 wills, so they finally get Gandalf, and scary because they're worried I have Day Without Dawn, and they're gonna have to use another ring to get into Mordor. Um, because like if you're in this position, uh, if I use Day Without Dawn and then you use a ring and don't get hit and revealed, and I have Cruel Weather, you lose another turn, um, uh, getting into Mordor. So that's why Waldo's saying that this is scary because it is. So go ahead and immediately start with Gandalf the White, which is of course correct, and then I've got a few options here. I have all these musters, and Gandalf is now in, and I could just muster up an Orthanc, but yeah, and I say sadly I don't have it about Day Without Dawn. So I do muster up an Orthanc, but now I'm going to reserve these other 3 musters, and the reason I do that is will be clear in just a second here. So my opponent recruits into Minas Tirith and Lost or Not, fine, and I go ahead and put Erebor under siege. And so I've reserved these musters with the intention of I'm going to take a couple swings at Erebor here, and if it goes well, great. I will have taken Erebor. If it doesn't go well, those 3 musters can be used in North Rune, and then I can move from Orthanc into Fords of Eisen, and from North Rune to East Rune. Or sorry, rather, I can move from Osgiliath to Pelargir. I can move those the army from Osgiliath to Pelargir, and the 3 elites I recruit in North Rune to East Rune, and then play Shadow Lengthens to reinforce both Dol Amroth and Erebor. And so I don't play. That's why I don't use Shadow Lengthens in this combat, because I'm treating that as a hedge to in case Erebor does not. In case I don't take Erebor, I need reinforcements in Erebor. So my opponent moves, does not get hit, and so I attack Erebor. I use Desperate Battle. My opponent plays a Sudden Strike. I think they were probably playing a Sudden Strike because they were assuming I was going to use a cancel there, a Swarm of Bats. And they were Sudden Strike wasn't played because he necessarily thought that was the best combat card. It was I think it was played to cancel in hopes of me playing a Swarm of Bats. My opponent gets a hit with a Sudden Strike, so good play. And I get 3 hits, which is great. My opponent gets 3 back. 2 back. They only have 1 leadership, not 2. So that extra 6 on their reroll doesn't count. So 2 hits. My opponent's down to 3 hit points. I press F7 and I draw Corsairs. And so I think if I hadn't drawn Shadow Lengthens, I would have held Corsairs here. But since I have Shadow Lengthens and I now know I have a way to reinforce Dol Amroth, I just go ahead and play the Deadly Strife and just completely blow up Erebor. So, and my opponent doesn't, unfortunately, only gets 1 hit back, which is not super likely. But even 3 hits back there, I'm still, I still have 4 hit points to take Dale. I'm still going to take Dale. So it doesn't really matter that much, but always disappointing to get 1 hit back against a Deadly Strife if you're the free people. Okay, so now I know that I can safely use these musters to reinforce my incoming attack on Helm's Deep. And I don't need them in North Rune anymore. So I go ahead and do exactly that. I start recruiting into Orthanc, and now I get Nazgul. So I knew this is what I needed because I want to be able to prosecute 2 sieges at the same time here, and so I needed more leadership to be able to both have full leadership in Dol Amroth and pop a couple Nazgul into Helm's Deep with my Warg leadership. But the thing I was concerned about by doing this is I would love to induce a ring move here out of my opponent. And I was a little bit worried that this Nazgul muster would give away that I have that I had Nazgul Search or Nazgul Strike as opposed to Cruel Weather. I did consider that, but I decided doesn't matter. Like, I need the Nazgul, so either my opponent moves or they don't. And he says, I really don't think you have it, but the top of the C deck has been nice to you. Not wrong. Um, and so he does elect to move. And honestly, I think this is right. Um, you still have a ring left for Mordor, and if you don't get in this turn, you probably just lose. The Fellowship is in fine health. Like, I think this is 100% correct. And I just get a 1. Yeah. And so, uh, yeah, no, Gandhi does. Well, you have my opponent had Gandalf now, but turn 6 Gandhi is pretty late. And so now I play Nazgul Search. I debated Nazgul Strike versus Nazgul Search here, but I just like Nazgul Strike could still miss, right? Like it's only 3 dice at 4, so it's 87.5%. And if you get a hit, like sure, you get 1 tile, but if it's not a reveal, it's still only 1 tile. And so, you know, a Nazgul Search here, like, is a guaranteed tile. Yeah, it could be an eye, but like, if you run the odds, Nazgul Search is for sure going to reveal, and it's going to have a 70% chance of pulling a tile that does damage, right? So 100%, my opponent will now need to use a die to hide next turn, which is big because dice economy is a big deal in Mordor. So, having another die that has to be spent on a hide rather than on a move, right? Like if you roll a will at the beginning of next turn and you're revealed, are you going to use that to hide, or are you going to hold it and hope I don't have Day Without Dawn, right? So again, this puts pressure on free people's dice by having them start Mordor revealed. So, I have a 70% chance of drawing a meaningful tile here, and a 100% chance of them being revealed. Whereas if I do Nazgul Strike, I have an 87.5% chance of drawing a meaningful tile, which is higher, and then a 50% chance of a reveal to get a second tile. But, I decided that it wasn't so much about corruption here as it was about speed. And so I valued the damage to the Fellowship less than I valued getting the guaranteed tile pull and the guaranteed reveal. So, as I said, Nazgul Search, 100% chance of reveal, 70% chance of effective tile versus a, 43% chance of reveal with Nazgul Strike. So a 43% chance of 2 tiles, an 87.5% chance of 1 tile, and then a 12.5% chance of nothing. So I decided I valued the tile more. And then not for nothing, pulling a 0 reveal or a 1 reveal out with Nazgul Strike isn't even necessarily that good, right? Because I want tiles that slow down the Fellowship. So, yes, pulling out the standard tiles would be great. Pulling out a 3 or a 2 would be great, but ultimately that was the calculus that was going on in my head when I decided what to do here. So I play Nazgul Search. I move down to Dol Amroth because, as previously stated, I have held this Shadow Lengthens for the express purpose of reinforcing Dol Amroth. And because I know I have that, I now feel comfortable, right, like taking a swing at Dol Amroth with the army that's parked on top of it, and then bringing in the army from Osgiliath. So go ahead and reveal. They pull an eye. So that's now the second tile that Moria and Morannon have both pulled eyes. So, if you're Fellowship, you love that, right? Like those are the ideal tiles to pull. It's the best possible tiles to pull if you get revealed through strongholds like that. So again, the Fellowship is now effective, -5 corruption heading into Mordor. So this is either like they're on track to dunk turn 8. So either I get my last 5 points in turn 7, or they dunk turn 8 is really where it seems like this game is headed. They now have their 5th die, which is a big deal. I draw a Isildur. And, again, we'll talk about this roll in a second. What I'm thinking about here is how I slow down the Fellowship, not how I damage it. So Isildur, theoretically good, but only 2 tiles actually accomplish what I want, which is to reveal them and slow them down. Pulling an eye would be bad. Pulling a 3 would be good, but like, does it really matter? Um, so I decide that Isildur, I'm going to cycle it, and if I get a red tile or Grond or Ring Wraiths or Black Captain Commands, like those are all cards that I can now use with this mountain of Palantirs that I've rolled. But in the grand scheme of things, I have a ring. I have Shadow Lengthens, which I know I want to use a Palantir for, and I have Fighting Uruk-hai, which I know I want to use a Palantir for. So, if I can cycle into a Palantir attack card from the C deck, like even though 5 Palantirs is never something you exactly want to see, it's not terrible given my hand and my plan. But my opponent does me a solid and rolls only 1 move. So if my opponent rolls 3 moves here, the game is just over. They'll just sprint up Mount Doom, and that will be it. So I go ahead and put Helm's Deep under siege here. Because I am planning to use Shadow Lengthens to reinforce it. But I do think that this is maybe a small mistake. Like, I could have moved like one. Okay. So here's what I probably should have done here. My sequencing was a little bit off here. I probably should have moved 1 elite and one, yeah, just 1 elite, maybe 2, but 1 elite out of Orthanc into Fords of Isen, and then made this attack into Helm's Deep. Because move 1 into Fords of Isen, made an attack into Dol Amroth, then played Shadow Lengthens and pulled the 2 regulars from South Dunland into Fords of Isen, so I didn't have to fully empty out Orthanc. My opponent doesn't have an available Palantir or Sea die. Like, they have to use those to move. They don't have an available one to they play Red Arrow. They don't have an available die to blow up Orthanc if they have a bunch of Vents. But I do leave myself open to that in just a second here. And, I can't play Fighting Uruk-hai if Saruman's dead. So, if they rolled slightly different dice, I think that was a slight inefficiency by me there. Not a huge deal, but just something I noticed watching it back afterwards. So I attack DA and I use a character card. Because again, the way that I get to 10 this turn is by attacking into Dol Amroth and getting either a Ring Wraiths or Grond or Black Captain. That is what I need. So I am cycling C cards here, and also I don't want to play like a Desperate Battle or something like that. Like I don't want to be in a position of setting myself up to potentially take 5 casualties here. 4, fine, right? But I just don't want to be in a position where the Witch King is potentially exposed to a sortie. So I attack, and I play Isildur here. And my opponent very wisely plays an advantageous position. So another great, excellent card play by my opponent. Didn't matter because I didn't roll any 5s, but still excellent play. I get 1 hit, my opponent gets 2 back. And I stop and draw. And so I actually still, in spite of the fact that, it's hard to see, I actually can still win this turn. If I cycle with my next attack in Dol Amroth into a Palantir attack card. So my opponent moves, gets a 3, takes a random, it's a Hobbit. So now Corruption's starting to creep up a little bit. I move over into Polar Gear, and I think about blocking Minas Morgul just in case. I mean, it's not super likely that this becomes a Free People military victory attempt, but actually decide not to do that because I like the idea of leaving it as bait rather than them ring moving. I don't think they'll take that bait, but I leave it and I move down to Gap of Rohan. I think that's this is the inefficiency I talked about, right? Like that should that move from Osgiliath into Pelargir, um, and a move of two of the elites from Orthanc into Fords of Eisen should have happened uh, before I attacked into Helm's Deep. Fine, whatever. So I play Shadow Lengthens, I reinforce in Dol Amroth, I reinforce in Helm's Deep, and I then just go ahead and play Fighting Urukai. Now, this is what, 15 hit points against 5, and I've got a Devilry to lead to start with. So, I mean, yeah, Helm's Deep is cooked probably 98% of the time here. And so I won't belabor it, but that's what happens. I know card after playing the Devilry and just kill all these poor souls in Helm's Deep. And then my opponent ring moves, which I think is correct. They pull an eye, and I say 12R, which is not correct. 12R would win me the game, but it is in fact 2R. And they take a random, they get Boromir, perfect. I would have loved that random to have been either a Hobbit or Strider. Either of those would have been, I would have been happier to see that. And, you know, so now I am in a little bit of a predicament because I could just play Lure of the Ring here and go for Strider. But if I do that, I know for sure that I can't win this turn. But if I cycle Lure of the Ring or Nazgul Strike and pull, I use a ring to attack, and if I pull Ring Wraiths or Black Captain, I could still win this turn by taking Dol Amroth in with this ring attack, and then using that Palantir attack to then take Dale from Erebor. So I, maybe playing Lure here is correct, but I forgot about this. I draw a card. This was actually the correct play, because now it gives me another shot at drawing one of the Palantir attacks before I, because if that had been Grond, right? If I draw that and that's Grond, I can just Grond into Dol Amroth and then use the ring to attack into Dale. But if I had just attacked with my Palantir here, then Grond wouldn't have been one of the I would be down to 2 cards instead of 3 cards out of the 15 that I was drawing from that would actually allow me to win in Dale. So I go ahead and draw first. And so I forego my opportunity to play Lure. My opponent hides. And I go ahead and do the CA attack. Now here, I actually do think this is a mistake. Because what I should play here is Nazgul Strike. I don't really care about how much, I mean, damage is good, but like, I don't really need the 5s on the rerolls here. And like, killing the leader is great because this is going to be a couple rounds of combat. And Lure of the Ring, it still isn't even entering my mind that this might become a corruption game. Have you picked up on where this game is headed? Because the Fellowship is still at effective 0, and they only have 3 steps left to go. So I go ahead and play Lure, and I think this was an error. I think playing Nazgul Strike here was better because all I really cared about was the cycle. And I go ahead and get 0 hits. So that's sad because I've now given up something that could have potentially, as I was talking about what was most important, slowed down the Fellowship. Because if they move and they're revealed, Lure could kill Strider, which slows them down because then they can't use his ability to hide. So, and my opponent gets 2 back, so that doesn't feel great. I press and draw. Now I get Foul Thing. So exact same sort of thought process. Foul Thing could slow them down. Now it could hit an eye, which would be catastrophic, which is why I think in this context, Lure is a much better card than Foul Thing. Because I really I don't want to pull one of those eyes. And so I just go ahead and cycle that. I don't know what I was thinking. I think at this point I have to know that I can't, like, I know I can't win this turn, right? I didn't cycle into one of the sea attack cards that I needed. So these character cards that could slow down the Fellowship are the cards that I need in my hand, not the cards I should be playing. Huge mistake. So my opponent plays guards, which they've been holding for a long time, and he tells me after the game he was really hoping I'd go for Minas Tirith with the Osgiliath army. And I finally get some hits, only 2, and my opponent gets 3 back. So I think about a press here, but I decide, no, I don't need to press. I can't win this turn. Um, so, pressing is actually better for my opponent here. I need to hold that and plan to reinforce Dol Amroth next turn and just cross my fingers and hope my opponent doesn't dunk. So I just go ahead and draw. And I get the perfect card because Shadow's Gather now allows me to reinforce from Pelargir with a Palantir instead of needing to attacks to reinforce. And so since I have a Palantir that will now I really feel like I need a Palantir and 2 attacks. That's all I need, right? To both take Dol Amroth and Dale. And so because I feel like all I need is a Palantir or an army die and then 2 more attacks, I actually feel really comfortable just throwing a bunch of eyes in the pool. Because again, this is now one of the ways that I can slow down the Fellowship. Like if they move and hit an eye, they're now pressured to potentially take Strider. And if they take Strider, like, unless they got 4 moves, they're out of rings. So this is one of the ways I can now slow them down is just by loading up the box with eyes. This is what we were talking about earlier with the uh, managing the size of the Fellowship, right? I can allocate more eyes in a situation like this and just cross my fingers and hope to get lucky, right? Like there are 4 out of 10 tiles, and they've got to take 3 steps, and 4 out of those 10 tiles are pretty bad. So let's see what happens. So my opponent, of course, moves very right off the bat with their will, and they hit an eye. So the thing that I top decked was candles. So now that you've hit an eye, I'm like, I'd be at very cross purposes here if I was playing Free People. On one hand, like, you really don't want to take a random and get the Hobbit here. That's really bad. Because while you've seen Isildur be played, right? And now, of course, I'm kicking myself for playing Isildur because, when he does take a random here and he does take a Hobbit, now, right? Like, a combination of Isildur and candles here, that's just probably game over, right? I mean, there's 6 out of 9 that would pull something useful for Isildur. 8, or rather 7 out of 9, because even the 0 reveal helps. And he does say no candles because he's worried that he's only 3 corruption away. And I do have candles, but I don't play it. And the reason I don't play it is because I want to hide that information, right? Like I want my opponent to make decisions thinking I don't have candles. And so like I want them to keep sprinting and potentially take a bunch more damage here. Rather than stopping and like playing Athelos if they have that in hand or something, like when I play candles. Because I leave myself flexibility here, right? I bring in the mouth. And so now I still have 3, I have an H, a Palantir or an H to Shadow's Gather from Pelargir to Dol Amroth. And if I do that, that means I actually get 2 attacks to try to take Dol Amroth. I have 2 dice to try to take Dol Amroth, and then the 1 sort of guaranteed die to take Dale. And so I really don't want to play candles yet. I want to see how Mordor develops. Because if my opponent, moves and hits Shelob, like I don't, and it doesn't kill them, like even if it's just a Shelob 1 or whatever, like I know I don't need to play candles this turn. And yeah, so really this is, I think there would be sort of a knee jerk instinct to play candles there to just go for the win. But I think that would be a mistake because I think like Shadow is in a dominant position here, both with respect to corruption and victory points. And so rather than giving the Fellowship more information with which to make decisions, I decided to just give them less. So they of course hide because they're still planning on a dunk this turn. I go ahead and attack Dale because I know I'm going to do that, so I might as well use one of my dice to do that. My opponent moves, and it's a 0 reveal. Not what I was looking for. the you know, it's okay. Uh, but basically the eye, Shelob, you know, any of those 3 out of, uh, 9 tiles basically instantly wins me the game, um, with candles in hand. Because it would like, if they pulled an eye there, they have to take Strider, and then they don't have a way to dunk this turn, and, they have 11 corruption, and I have candles. So, a 3 there would have been good. I guess a 0 is fine. Um, I guess it kinda doesn't matter which tile I got unless it was, uh, an eye or Shelob, but, I'm not gonna complain too much because that first eye on the first move this turn was huge, um, in terms of getting them into the danger zone where candles could potentially just win. So I now, play Shadows Gather, and I don't use the Palantir for this because I'm, again, holding that Palantir for candles, or I can just use the ring that I've got to make that my second attack, depending on what my opponent does. So my opponent goes ahead and hides here. And now, you know, this is not one of those situations where candles like makes the difference between making eyes deadly or not. Eyes are deadly, if they move here, right? Like an eye is 6 damage, but I've got a 12% chance to just win outright. So if my opponent moves here, they have um uh, a 5 out of 8 chance to dunk, but in reality, it's about a 50-50 game, because I have just a straight 12% chance to win then multiplied by my 37.5% chance to pull a winning tile. So it is literally exactly a 50-50 game right here. So I go ahead and play candles, and I get 2. So um, we are now in this end game where my opponent's going to move, and it's 5 tiles, free people win, 3 tiles, shadow wins, um, and he could decide to wait until next turn, but and I'm guessing he has Athelos or something like that in hand, which is why he thinks about this decision to move for a while. And I say I'm regretting dumping all those FSP damaging cards earlier. Yep. Um, and he decides to move, which is correct, right? Like, this is 4 hit points against 11, and he doesn't know it, but I mean, I've got 2 Desperate Battles, right? Like, Dol Amroth is probably cooked. Not guaranteed, but probably cooked. And so my opponent does the right thing here and moves. And I say GG because, this was a great game. It literally was a 50-50 game at the end here. And Waldo played great, but I pull an eye. And, you know, not my favorite way to win the game, but and I really did not think this was going to be a corruption game. I just got lucky in Mordor. I got lucky with the 1R pull on Orc Patrol outside of Mordor. Like, a lot of things had to go my way for this to even be close. Um, but you know, so sometimes that's just what happens to free people, and um, you know, very very well played to Waldo. A great opponent, and yeah, played a great game. Um, and anytime a game comes down to a literal coin flip, you know, you doesn't really matter what that last tile is. I mean, it does because this is a tournament. Uh, but I think both of us can feel pretty good about how we played here. Even though I have a couple things like that I feel like I should have done a little bit differently, um, I still feel good about how I played the game. And yeah, he asked to roll it out, which is totally fair, right? He wants to see how Dol Amroth would go. So we do simulate Dol Amroth. I play a Desperate Battle. He plays a Power to Great. I get 3 hits on the first round, and he gets 3 back. So he's only got 1 hit point left. I play my second Desperate Battle. He plays a Heroic Death, and I only get 1 hit. So we simulate this battle, and Dol Amroth would have held. So yeah, a crazy game. I hope everybody enjoyed it. We'll probably play our second match sometime next week, and I'll be casting that one as well. And yeah, I'll see you all next time. Thanks for making it this far. I know that this was a long video, even though it was only a turn 8 game, but a very interesting game, even though it was a pretty standard sprint game. I think a lot of interesting options and moves, and yeah, just great play by Waldo. So thanks again to Waldo, and thanks to all of you. I'll see you next time.